Racism in political discourse is not a new phenomenon, but the way it manifests in modern times continues to reveal how deeply ingrained prejudice is within the structures of power and public dialogue. When elected officials or public figures resort to attacks that target someone's race or identity instead of engaging with their ideas or policies, it exposes a larger issue that goes far beyond a single incident. It demonstrates that racism is not merely a relic of the past but an active tool that is still used to discredit, demean, and silence voices that challenge the status quo. In the case of Jasmine Crockett's clash with Laura Loomer, the racist undertones of the attack brought to light how often black women in positions of authority are forced to defend their humanity before they can even begin to discuss their work. This is an unfortunate reality in political spaces where credibility should be determined by policy and performance, not by skin color or background, and yet time and again, prejudice rears its head to remind us that equality in rhetoric does not match equality in treatment. The use of racism as a tactic in political confrontation reflects the inability of some individuals to counter arguments with reason or fact. Instead, they lean on the most shallow, damaging forms of insult in an attempt to undermine the character of those they oppose. These kinds of attacks are designed to distract from meaningful debate and to shift the narrative from one of substance to one of division. When someone like Loomer chooses to hurl racist comments at Crockett, it sends a message that the intention is not to engage in healthy discourse but to belittle and provoke. Racism in politics becomes a strategy, and unfortunately, one that still gains traction because of the social and cultural biases that remain deeply rooted. The fact that such rhetoric can still find a platform reveals the urgent need to confront and dismantle these biases at every level of political engagement. Furthermore, racism in political spaces has an insidious way of reinforcing stereotypes. Attacks based on identity often perpetuate harmful narratives about who belongs in positions of power and who does not. Black women, in particular, have historically faced the double burden of racism and sexism, which positions them at the intersection of two systems of oppression. When someone like Crockett speaks out or challenges the narrative, she is not only fighting for her voice to be heard in that moment but also confronting centuries of exclusion and silencing. The clash with Loomer becomes emblematic of how progress in representation does not automatically erase prejudice. Rather, it often provokes backlash from those who feel threatened by the shifting balance of power. Racist attacks are an attempt to reassert dominance by reducing individuals to their race, stripping them of the legitimacy they have earned through merit and service. One of the most damaging effects of racism in political discourse is how it distorts the focus of conversations that should otherwise be about governance and policy. Instead of addressing critical issues that affect communities, such as healthcare, education, or economic justice, the dialogue gets hijacked by racist attacks and the responses they demand. This creates a cycle where the targets of racism are compelled to defend themselves against baseless insults rather than being allowed to speak on their terms. Crockett's confrontation with Loomer exemplifies this dynamic. While Crockett's sharp retort exposed the ignorance underlying the racist attack, it also highlighted how she was forced into a position where she had to redirect the conversation away from personal slander and back toward the dignity that should define political spaces. The persistence of these distractions weakens the ability of the public to engage with real solutions and undermines the purpose of democratic dialogue. It is also important to consider how racism in political discourse affects public perception. When people witness racist attacks being normalized in debates, interviews, or social media exchanges, it creates an environment where prejudice can feel validated. This normalization is dangerous because it emboldens others to repeat or mimic such behavior in their own spheres of influence. Political figures set examples, whether they intend to or not, and when racism is displayed openly without consequence, it trickles down into the attitudes and interactions of everyday citizens. In this sense, Loomer's attack was not just about one individual, it was about signaling to an audience that such rhetoric is acceptable. Crockett's refusal to let the comment pass unchallenged was therefore significant, as it modeled the importance of standing against racism in real time and refusing to let it go unaddressed. Another layer of this issue is the way racism in politics is used to distract audiences from systemic injustices. By framing conflicts around personal insults and identity-based attacks, larger issues of inequality often go unnoticed. Instead of examining policies that disproportionately harm marginalized communities, the spotlight gets pulled toward the sensationalism of racist rhetoric. This tactic benefits those who thrive on chaos and division, as it ensures that meaningful progress becomes harder to achieve. Crockett's experience is not unique. Countless politicians of color have faced similar attempts to derail their contributions by reducing them to their race. These moments remind us that racism in political discourse is not isolated but part of a broader pattern meant to silence diverse voices and maintain entrenched hierarchies of power. In addition, racism in political spaces reveals a lack of accountability in the platforms that amplify such messages. Social media, news outlets, and political forums often become breeding grounds for racist attacks, giving them visibility and reach that multiplies their impact. When Loomer's comments circulated, they were not confined to a private exchange, they were projected to a wide audience, magnifying their harm. This underscores the role of media and technology in either challenging or perpetuating racism. If unchecked, these platforms allow prejudice to spread unchecked, but when held accountable, they can also serve as powerful tools to call out and dismantle such rhetoric. Crockett's clash with Loomer gained traction precisely because it was amplified, and that amplification gave people an opportunity to confront the ugliness of racism in politics head-on. Racism in political discourse also exposes the fragility of those who use it. Resorting to racist insults is often a sign that substantive arguments are lacking, and prejudice becomes the last weapon of choice for those unable to defend their positions with logic or evidence. This fragility is laid bare when figures like Loomer choose to attack identity instead of engaging ideas. By contrast, the resilience shown by those on the receiving end demonstrates strength and conviction. Crockett's response embodied this strength, showing that even when racism is used as a weapon, it can be turned back to expose the weakness of the attacker. This dynamic illustrates the stark difference between those who build arguments on hatred and those who rise above it with dignity. Jasmine Crockett's resilience is one of the defining qualities that has made her such a powerful presence in political spaces, and her clash with Laura Loomer perfectly illustrates how resilience is not just about enduring attacks but about transforming them into opportunities to highlight truth and expose ignorance. When Loomer attempted to demean Crockett with a racist attack, the intent was clearly to discredit her and reduce her voice to a caricature based on prejudice. Yet Crockett did not falter or allow the attack to silence her. Instead, she responded with a sharp and confident remark, one that not only defended her dignity but also made the attack appear small and absurd in comparison. This moment reflects the way resilience is not passive but active, a deliberate choice to stand firm in one's identity and values while facing hostility. For Crockett, resilience meant turning the spotlight back onto her attacker and showing the audience that bigotry cannot overshadow intelligence, authenticity, and self-respect. Resilience in this context is particularly important because of the unique challenges faced by women of color in politics. Black women, in particular, often find themselves navigating environments where their competence and legitimacy are questioned simply because of their race and gender. Attacks like the one from Loomer are designed to amplify those doubts and force individuals like Crockett to spend energy defending themselves against baseless accusations instead of advancing their ideas. Crockett's resilience allowed her to refuse that trap. By answering back with confidence and refusing to let the insult define the moment, she reasserted control over the narrative. This is resilience as resistance, using wit and clarity not only to deflect harm but also to show that attempts to marginalize her will ultimately fail. Her presence and her voice became stronger in the aftermath of the clash, which demonstrates how resilience can flip the script and transform an attempted act of degradation into a moment of empowerment. Her resilience also highlights the importance of authenticity in leadership. Crockett's response was not rehearsed or staged, it came from a place of genuine self-assurance. Audiences could see that she was not shaken by Loomer's words but instead chose to meet them head-on with strength and composure. This authenticity resonates with people because it reflects a leader who is both human and courageous, someone who can face adversity without hiding behind carefully crafted statements. Resilience, in this sense, is about showing the world that one's identity is not a weakness to be exploited but a source of pride and power. Crockett's refusal to diminish herself or to let racism dictate her role in the conversation sends a strong message that resilience comes from embracing who you are without apology. It is also worth noting that resilience in the face of racism requires immense emotional labor. The burden placed on Crockett to respond with grace and strength is one that many people of color carry in professional and public spaces. It is not fair that she should have to endure such attacks at all, much less be expected to respond in a way that both defends herself and educates others. Yet Crockett's resilience is evident in how she handled this responsibility. She did not shy away from calling out the racism embedded in the attack, but she also chose to do so in a way that elevated the conversation rather than descending into the same vitriol that was directed at her. This balancing act requires emotional resilience as much as it requires intellectual sharpness, and Crockett's ability to navigate it demonstrates her strength as both a leader and a person committed to standing against injustice. Resilience is also tied to the broader tradition of resistance among black women in leadership. Crockett's clash with Loomer did not occur in isolation. It is part of a longer legacy where black women have been forced to prove their worth repeatedly in the face of systemic prejudice. Figures throughout history have embodied resilience in similar ways, whether in politics, activism, or community leadership. Crockett's response to Loomer connects her to this lineage, showing that resilience is not just about individual strength but also about carrying forward the collective determination of those who came before. In this way, her resilience becomes more than personal, it becomes representative of a wider fight for respect, equity, and recognition that extends beyond her own career. Another aspect of Crockett's resilience is her ability to use wit as a tool of defense. Humor and sharp retorts can be powerful ways to disarm opponents and expose the ridiculousness of their attacks. When Crockett responded to Loomer by pointing out her own age with the line, "I am 12 years older," she flipped the insult on its head and made the attack seem not only mean-spirited but foolish. This cleverness is a form of resilience because it prevents the attack from landing as intended and instead reframes the exchange in a way that empowers the target. Wit requires presence of mind and confidence, qualities that Crockett clearly displayed in that moment. By using humor, she not only protected herself but also invited the audience to see the absurdity of the racism directed at her, which further undercut Loomer's attempt to gain power through hate. Resilience in politics is also about refusing to let attacks dictate one's trajectory. Crockett's career and public service are defined by her work on policies and her commitment to her constituents, not by the insults thrown her way. By standing firm in moments like this clash, she demonstrates that resilience means keeping one's focus intact and refusing to be derailed. The attempt to demean her could have shifted the narrative to one of scandal or controversy, but her resilience ensured that the story became one of strength and courage instead. This ability to maintain direction despite distractions is a key trait of successful leaders, and Crockett's response shows how resilience can act as a shield that allows her to continue moving forward. Finally, Crockett's resilience serves as an example to others who may face similar forms of prejudice in their own lives. By showing that it is possible to confront racism with dignity and confidence, she provides a model for younger generations and for peers who may struggle with how to respond to attacks on their identity. Resilience is not about pretending the attacks do not hurt or denying their existence, it is about choosing not to let them define you. Crockett's clash with Loomer, and the way she handled it, illustrates how resilience can transform moments of pain or hostility into moments of inspiration. It shows that even in the harshest environments, one can stand firm, speak clearly, and refuse to be diminished. The larger lesson that emerges from the clash between Jasmine Crockett and Laura Loomer is one that reaches beyond the individual exchange and touches on broader questions of accountability, respect, and representation in leadership. Political debates are supposed to be spaces where ideas are challenged, policies are scrutinized, and the public gains insight into the visions of those who aspire to lead. Yet when racism enters the discourse, it corrodes that purpose and turns the conversation into something destructive. The clash reveals how much work still needs to be done to hold individuals accountable for their words, especially when those words are meant to demean someone's identity rather than engage with their ideas. Accountability in this context means more than just criticizing bad behavior. It means creating a culture where such behavior is recognized for what it is, an attempt to undermine democratic values, and ensuring that those who perpetuate it do not escape consequences. Respect is another central lesson to draw from this moment. Respect should be a fundamental principle in political life, where individuals from diverse backgrounds come together to govern a society that itself is diverse. When that respect is violated through racist attacks, it is not just one individual being targeted, it is entire communities who feel the impact. The attack on Crockett was not only a personal insult but also a signal to others that they too could be diminished because of their identity. This is why Crockett's response carried weight beyond her own defense. It was a reaffirmation that respect cannot be abandoned, even in the heat of conflict. By refusing to bow to the insult and instead confronting it directly, she reminded everyone that respect is non-negotiable and must remain at the heart of leadership if it is to be truly representative. The issue of representation is deeply connected to this. The presence of leaders like Crockett in positions of power reflects progress toward a more inclusive political system, but incidents like this reveal how fragile that progress can appear in the face of hostility. Representation is not just about numbers, it is about ensuring that leaders of diverse backgrounds are able to serve without being constantly forced to defend their right to exist in those spaces. The clash with Loomer underscores how representation is challenged not only by structural barriers but also by the toxic culture of discourse that seeks to delegitimize leaders who do not fit traditional molds. Crockett's ability to push back against this hostility demonstrates why representation matters. It ensures that voices that have historically been excluded are not only present but empowered to stand tall in the face of prejudice. Another larger lesson is about the way society must examine the platforms that allow racism to thrive in public debate. Loomer's comments did not occur in a vacuum, they were amplified by media, social networks, and the appetite for controversy that often drives attention in politics. This amplification gives racism a megaphone, spreading its harm further than the initial exchange. The lesson here is that accountability cannot stop at the individual level but must also include the systems that broadcast and normalize these attacks. Media outlets, commentators, and even the public have a role to play in either challenging or enabling racism. The larger lesson is that a truly democratic society cannot tolerate the normalization of hate in its discourse, and it must actively push back against platforms that allow it to spread unchecked. This moment also teaches us about the resilience of democratic ideals in the face of division. Racist attacks are designed to fracture, to create wedges between groups and individuals, and to shift focus away from policy and progress. Yet the way Crockett turned the attack into an opportunity to highlight ignorance showed that these divisive tactics can be resisted. The larger lesson is that democracy is strengthened not when prejudice goes unchallenged but when it is confronted head-on by leaders who refuse to let hate set the terms of the debate. This confrontation becomes a defense of democracy itself, reminding citizens that their leaders must be held to a standard that values equality and respect over bigotry and insult. The clash also brings forward the lesson of courage in leadership. Leaders are often tested not by the smooth paths they walk but by the obstacles placed in their way. Crockett's confrontation with Loomer became a public test of her ability to remain steady in the face of provocation. Her courage in answering back, in refusing to be silenced or diminished, illustrates the kind of leadership that inspires confidence. The larger lesson here is that courage is not only about standing up for oneself but also about standing up for the principles one represents. By defending her dignity, Crockett was also defending the dignity of countless others who have experienced similar attacks in less visible spaces. Leadership requires this kind of courage, because without it, prejudice goes unchallenged and respect loses its foundation. Another lesson that can be drawn is about the importance of dialogue grounded in substance rather than spectacle. When political exchanges devolve into personal attacks, the opportunity for meaningful dialogue is lost. Loomer's racist attack was meant to create spectacle, to grab attention, and to derail the conversation. Crockett's response, however, pointed back toward substance by revealing the emptiness of the attack and recentering the conversation on dignity. The lesson here is that the public must demand more from its political discourse, refusing to be satisfied with empty insults and insisting on debates that address real issues. This is not just a lesson for politicians but for citizens as well, who have the power to reject the spectacle and hold leaders accountable for engaging in dialogue that matters. The clash further teaches about the ripple effect of representation and resistance. When Crockett stood firm, she was not only addressing Loomer but also sending a message to others who might face similar attacks. The larger lesson is that each act of resistance against racism has a ripple effect, empowering others to speak up and defend themselves. Representation in leadership positions amplifies this effect because it shows that strength can prevail even in hostile environments. The impact of Crockett's resilience extends beyond the walls of that particular debate and into the lives of people who see in her a reflection of their own struggles and aspirations. This ripple effect is part of the larger lesson that representation is not symbolic but deeply transformative when paired with the courage to confront injustice. The final larger lesson is about the standards we set for leadership in our society. Leaders should be judged by their ideas, their integrity, and their commitment to serving the public. When racism enters the discourse, it corrodes those standards and replaces them with division and hostility. Crockett's ability to rise above the attack and maintain her composure reinforced the idea that leadership is about more than holding a position, it is about embodying values that inspire trust and respect.